So something to think about. Maybe I wouldn't be able to say something about emotion. So now I'm just curious. I mean, before hearing about this wacky view, had you ever asked yourself where the mind is? Not just what is cognition, but where is it? And you don't need to answer now, but that's something you might want to discuss. Do you think this question makes any sense? Because it is an interesting position, which is to say that it's just a wrong-headed question from the beginning. So, well, if you think it does make sense, explain why. If it doesn't make sense, say why not. And then maybe you can debate whether you think that, in fact, the example in Clark and Chalmers works. So does Otto's memory, do you think it's convincing that it includes the notebook? Then, in any case, provides reason for your answers, whatever that answer is. I want to say something here because the workshop was about consciousness. And I've been talking all the time about cognition. But I hope I've made it quite apparent that there are difficult questions about not just consciousness, but about cognition itself. So it's not that we know what cognition is and what does cognition, obviously, and it's just consciousness that is a problem. It's the very question of what is a cognitive system, where is the part of the world that does cognition. Then there's consciousness, even more complicated. So just a matter of curiosity, I mention it in case you want to pursue this as a research project. But very curiously, so Clark and Chalmers have been careful to say, we talk about extended cognition, and Clark in particular said, I don't want to talk about extended consciousness. In fact, he thinks that consciousness does not extend. So he thinks that the physical basis of consciousness is still the brain only, and he thinks that's because he thinks only the brain has the connectivity that is necessary for consciousness. So that's quite interesting, and again, debate here. Some people are saying no. If your arguments can be applied to consciousness as well. I'm not going to go into that. I just wanted to raise this point, and maybe you will want to discuss this at all. So now I have a choice. So I can either tell you in 5 minutes about some objections that have been raised to this view and some replies that Clark and Chalmers, Clark in particular, have given. So it's a hugely debated view. As you may imagine, some people go like, this is crazy, where are we going to stop? And other people think, no, this makes sense. But in any case, lots of objections have been then given replies. I could just give you a sense of the debate, and that's it. Or I can just skip this and jump to emotion and just, well, can we apply this view onto emotion? How could that be? I see some noddings there, but maybe you can have raise of hand who prefers that I just talk about this. And who wants to hear about emotion and extended mind? Okay, 2 wins. So, okay. So I'm going to proceed as follows. So I'm going to think, well, if, say, we accept this extended cognition view, then can it be applied to emotion? So obviously this is something that you might say, no, I don't accept the extended cognition view in the first place, so I don't see how it can be extended on emotion. Maybe some people think, well, no, it doesn't make any sense into cognition, but maybe in emotion it works. So there are various options, but I'm just going to proceed in this way. If we accept the extended cognition view, then can we apply to emotion? What would that be? And yeah. So now, I think it may, to some people, it may be even strange. If it's strange to talk about embodied extended cognition, it might even be stranger to talk about extended emotion. Because emotions, as we've seen, they involve changes in the body, feelings seem to be quite central to how you characterize emotions. So emotions seem to be, okay, maybe they're not in the brain only, but they seem to be very much restricted to the living organism. And for example, Kim Sterelny, who is maybe the most famous philosopher of biology, who is very interested in extended cognition questions, he wrote at some point stuff like this. He said, it is hard to credibly imagine Otto keeping his preferences in his notebook, representing the information that he's gay or that he likes blondes. The notebook might be an external belief store, but not an extended store of lusts, longings, hopes, and preferences. So what he's saying, imagine Otto, he goes to the museum, gets there, and says, oh, yes, Picasso. Do I like Picasso? But I mean, not, yes, I do. Oh, wonderful. So he's trying to say, no, that doesn't work like that. So he says the notebook might, of course, be an external cue, a prompt that allows Otto better access to his internal embodied wants and desires. But it cannot substitute for those internal states, for these have a phenomenological, embodied component. So here the idea seems to be because emotions are so bodily and phenomenological states, then you can't extend them. You can't in notebook, part of an emotion. So I want to just suggest that this view may not be so crazy after all. And I'm going to do something strange here. I'm going to tell you one way in which you might want to try to extend emotions by actually saying that you can extend the cognitive aspect, but I don't believe that the cognitive aspect. So that's, see, here I'm just gonna, I'm not giving you my own, I'm just giving you the typical philosophical, if this, then that. So if you accept extended mind, extended cognition view, that's how you should go about extended cognition, emotion. That's one way to go about it. So you kind of say, okay, well, wait a minute, emotions are also cognitive states or involve cognitive states, so we can extend at least the cognitive part of emotion. So you might come up with an example such as the following. Eve, that's my example, she has a diary in which she writes every evening. She reads her diary, and she often, in this diary, she complains about her parents. She writes down things like, my father doesn't care about me, my mother always criticizes me, my brother is very selfish. And writing and reading these thoughts makes her feel resentful. And in particular, the act of writing, so as she writes her journal, she's able to articulate thoughts that she would otherwise not have, to clarify, structure her thoughts. And without this process, maybe Eve would not be so resentful. See, because she keeps this diary, writes in it, reads it every night, then she has, we can say she bears this resentment throughout maybe her whole life. Without that, she might not be so resentful. So then this is something to think about. First of all, do you think this could be an example of an extended emotion, like an extended resentment? If yes, why? If not, why not? Can you think of other examples that might illustrate an extended emotion? So can we extend emotions maybe not by extending the cognitive part, maybe because the cognitive and the emotion are not so obviously separable. Or maybe, maybe you still think that a whole view extending the mind is crazy and that applies to emotion too. And okay, that's still obviously a possibility.
Aren't you talking about the practice of writing now rather than...
Sorry, yes, no, I'm just giving you questions for later. Maybe too many.
Sorry. In the case of calling that a case of extended mind,
yeah.
You're talking about the practice of writing that gives you this emotion, right?
Yeah.
Rather than the book itself.
Yeah.
Just like when I'm running,
yeah.
right, I get some kind of physical state, but it's not...
But it's also, the practice of writing involves writing something out there and having it there as a thing that then you also read. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, but it seems to be like most of the work is being done by the writing process itself. Which
I don't know.
more interactive.
Plus reading part.
Yeah, then that is the same for the auto case.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also like if there wouldn't be reading and writing involved, then it wouldn't.
Yeah.
Work. So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but something to think about.
So let me maybe try to give an example that doesn't have that problem. There's a phenomenon that's referred to as the internet echo chamber, which is that if you get a group of people together to talk online, it tends to create some kind of centralized set of beliefs or feelings. And basically, this kind of thing will amplify. Like if someone is a little angry at something, they become very angry about it. If someone is a little resentful, they become very resentful. And it spreads to everyone in that localized community. So in some sense, actually, you can go somewhere and someone else's anger can be imported into your own experience through interacting with this shared environment.
Is that a little different though, because it includes other people?
It's more extended.
Well, it's more subjective. But I mean, I don't know if that would that be an example of it?
I think it's an interesting example. In fact, there are people who are trying to talk about extended emotion in terms of intersubjectively shared emotions, looking at developmental studies, and so, for example, the close mother-infant interaction and how, say, the mother is always guiding and modulating the infant's attention, and that determines the emotion well, the emotion the infant has, but also the emotional character of that interaction. So that's obviously different based on different arguments than Clark and Chalmers. We're here in the domain of the physical interaction and no writing down on material objects. But this is, again, it's up for discussion. You know, can we talk about extended mind in that sense? Maybe it's even more meaningful than that. So it's all very, you know, something you can attach to and write something about it, because it's really, no one has an answer to that. These questions have not been asked. So okay, I'll just give you very finally more thoughts about, you know, maybe emotions can be extended in some other way. Maybe what about the autonomic aspects of emotions? So that was a picture of the autonomic nervous system and all the organs it innervates. These are not under voluntary control. But so, you know, take the heart. If we take, you know, heart rate and heart activity as part of emotions, you know, when you're afraid, you feel your heart does accelerate, you feel it even. Well, then what about, you know, people who have a pacemaker that regulates heart rate? Can it be seen, you know, part of an emotional episode? You're afraid that you have a pacemaker and the pacemaker is regulating the heart. Well, but then I think people would say that's part of the emotional system. But then the pacemaker could just as well be outside. I mean, maybe not practically, but conceptually, what difference does it make? So maybe that's one way in which you can extend emotions. And then I want to just very briefly, I'm not going to go through this, but I just want to give this example. So think of some musician who is improvising on a saxophone, you know, as a professional musician who doesn't know, you know, maybe his friend has died and he's grieving, but he has this mass of confused feelings, and then he starts to play the instrument, and the way he starts to play influences what he feels, and then what he feels is going to influence what he plays next, such that eventually he comes to have a specific emotional feeling which he wouldn't have had without that precise interaction with that instrument. So what do you think that would say? You know, is that an extended emotion? What is extended exactly? Can we say the feeling is extended? And even if you don't think the feeling is extended, I think the last very final point I want to make is that the extended mind view, okay, maybe you think it's crazy, but I think it does give an important message, which is that if you want to give explanations of certain phenomena, then in some cases at least, you will have to look at the loops between brain, body, and environment as well. So in particular, in the kind of feeling that this person comes to experience. You know, you cannot explain it without looking at the whole loop between what he does and the way the instrument is the qualities of the instrument, to be very brief. So take home point about complexity, because this is about works about complexity. I think if you take anything away from this talk or from the summer school, I would be very happy if it were the following: that the causal interrelations between brain, body, and world are very complex. They are characterized by reciprocal influences unfolding over time, and we need to keep this complexity in mind when we make claims about where the mind, including consciousness, is, and about which parts of the complex organism world system are responsible for or even sufficient for certain mental functions. And that's all. Thank you.